meditation centers, temples, ashrams, spiritual communities, and dare I say, podcast networks are in one fundamental way places of peace, reminders of the peace and harmony possible for us in our lives. A moderately paraphrased quote from Jack Kornfield in this wonderful episode of Heart Wisdom 305, Remembering the Pleasure of Peace. This Dharma Talk first took place on July 12th of 1993 and dives in to some really crucial topics for today's world. How we can keep a spacious heart amidst any turbulence, how to face the reality of impermanence with real love, and making sure that our meditation and our spiritual practice is not a self-improvement project, but a way to rest in the nature of who we truly are. Before we dive in, there's actually some really meaningful housekeeping this week. Jack has just released a brand new course of unearthed lost tapes. These are from a retreat that happened in Yucca Valley in 1990. This is rare, never-before-seen footage from 35 years ago. So if you want to know what it was like to be on retreat with Jack back in the day, this is a dynamic adventure. It is called The Sacred Journey Home, Timeless Teachings on Freedom and Love Just Where You Are. And besides the deep wisdom, all about how to walk this spiritual path in grace, equanimity, and love, the wonderful vintage 90s footage and Jack's vintage 90s clothing style is worth the price of admission alone. The Sacred Journey begins September 23rd on jackkornfield.com. And if you're listening after, this will be an evergreen course, which you can take at your own pace and get lifetime access to. So please do dive in at any time. Then on this September 20th, Jack will be leading a day-long retreat for Spirit Rock Meditation Center. This will be online only, an opportunity to hang with Jack, and a great way to start off this cozy autumn season at home with Sangha. This is Compassion, Courage, Wisdom, and Love, a day-long retreat for navigating wild times. And last but not least, Jack has a new book coming out titled All in This Together. These are timeless stories and teachings on loving each other and the world. It comes out November 11th, but you can pre-order the signed edition right now at jackkornfield.com. So there we go. I do hope you enjoy this episode 305, Remembering the Pleasure of Peace. May you be happy and healthy. May you be safe and protected. May you meet life with a loving, spacious heart. And may you always remember the pleasure of peace. Namaste. So again, let yourself sit in a way that's comfortable and at rest. Meditation centers, temples, ashrams are in one fundamental way places of peace, that is, reminders of the kind of peace or harmony that is possible for us in our lives. And within them, if they are actively pursuing the spiritual practices, one finds a certain spaciousness, a pleasure of the spaciousness of such places. And it's that spaciousness that I'd like to speak of this evening. 2 weeks ago, you may remember, those who were here, I told the story of the ancient Indian story of the visit of Nachiketa to Lord Yama, the Lord of Death, asking for 3 boons or 3 blessings. And in that same vein, it is said that a man came to visit the Buddha at one time when the Buddha was resting with his monks in the forest, bowed, paid his respects, and said, "I understand you are Buddha." And the Buddha replied, "Yes, what can I do for you?" And he said, "I have a question for you.
I would like to know how it is that a person can live or be such that they will not be seen by the king of death. This is a little bit like Nachiketa's third question to Lord Yama. And after a due silence, the Buddha replied. He said, "For one who abides in selflessness, who does not claim as I or me or self or mine anything in this world, such a one will not be seen by the king of death." In another early text of the Buddha's, a sutra on loving kindness, on the perfection of the great heart of loving kindness, where the Buddha talks about how wondrous it is to develop loving kindness for all beings, all creatures. He said, "Thus I instruct you, my friends, monks and nuns, to follow in this way. And even if a man should come along and threaten you, or harm you, or cut off your hands and feet, your limbs, if you should harbor any ill will toward that person, any ill will instead of loving kindness, you cannot rightly be said to be a true disciple of mine." Now, I read this when I was a young monk in a monastery, and I looked at it and I said, forget it, no way. I mean, I have ill will toward people for much less than that. And I'm sure you've all noticed in yourself the same. And I began to reflect, what does this point to? What does this say? How could one possibly do that? Because if someone physically harms your body, how could you not respond with aversion and anger and ill will and fear? And as I reflected and my meditation deepened, I began to realize that the only way that one could respond in that fashion was through a shift of identity. As long as this is my body, this is taken as who I am, this personality in this body, there's no way that that response will not happen. But it's possible to shift. Consciousness is really flexible and it's fabulous. It can create and expand and touch anything. And when our identity opens to something which is greater or more timeless, when we see the fleetingness and the impermanence of this body that we cling to and realize this is not who we are, then something else becomes possible. There's a story that the Jungian writer writes so well, Robert Johnson, tells in this very fine book on same-sex love that just came out, some friends wrote. He said he went to India, and people warned him in his first trip, "Robert, you've got to steel yourself before you get there, or it will just sweep you off your feet. You're going to be stepping over dead corpses in the street. There'll be lepers after you, people with amputated legs poking into your ribs. You'll watch people starving before your eyes." And all of that turned out to be true, he said, and yet I survived. I had some bad moments, but somehow my sense of reality expanded to take in this dimension of life. But what no one prepared me for was the immense deep happiness of so many people in India, people who had no reason to be happy. Some of them are starving to death on the edge of disaster, living for all intents on the streets, outdoors, with no idea where their food will be coming from. But they're happy people with nothing to be happy about. I found out that you're not ever happy about anything. You're just happy. Happy and happening are the same word in the dictionary. So if you want to make friends with an Indian, he goes on talking about being there, you don't talk to them or look at them directly. You just kind of edge up next to them. Usually has to be someone of the same sex. And wait. And if he consents to something with you, he won't go anywhere. He'll just stand there or sit there. And after what seems like a terribly long period of time, then somebody says something or somebody does something, and then you two are probably friends for as long as you wish or intend, likely for life. And this is not taken lightly. For example, one day I was riding my bicycle, minding my own business, though nothing is ever entirely one's own business in India. when a young fellow came along parallel to me. In good Anglo-Saxon style, I moved over slightly and dutifully looking straight ahead. The young fellow remained parallel to me, so I moved over a little farther, but he was still there. He moved closer. Presently, he reached out, took my hand, and we proceeded for several blocks riding together hand in hand. Then he turned off at the next street, and I never saw him again, at least not for a while. But the connection was engaged, and a bond was made that is the genius of India. And if I ever saw him again, he would have been my true friend. One further story. I didn't know my way around that wonderful world of India, but I ended up making friends amazingly quickly anyway. Then I got sick, nothing permanent, mind you, but very sick. I was in an Indian hospital, which is another word for nightmare. They explained it to me. It was supposed to be truly modern, westernized. They had one thermometer, which all of us patients had in succession, one after another. I objected, and they said, it's all right because we rinse it off each time under the tap. Somehow, we all survived. The point of this story was that my first Indian friend, who'd taken me on as a blood brother, for what reason I'll never know, it's futile to ask, came and slept under my bed at night. He said, I'm not going to leave you there alone. So he, or someone assigned by him, slept under my hospital bed every night I was there, which is common in India. Now, if I go to the hospital in America, I can't get anybody to sleep under my bed. It's not possible. One day when my fever was 104 and I was just slightly out of my head, Amba Shankar, which was his name, stood at the foot of my bed and told me a story of his friend Baba. Baba had another friend, and this friend was ill. It looked as if Baba's friend might die. So Baba came to his friend and said, I wish to die for you, and you have only to say the word, and I will go and die that you may live. This is my wish, this is my friendship, this is how it is. The friend agreed, so Baba went away and died, and the friend lived. Being told this story, which is something like out of the Arabian Nights, snapped me into focus because Amba Shankar then said, you say the word, and I will go die, and then you will be all right. I was utterly speechless. I don't understand things like this. My heart understood and resonates, but none of my Anglo-Saxon verbal Western mind could cope with it. So I managed to say, Amba, I do not think I'm that ill. Don't do anything now, please. I think we will both pull through. And as it happens, we did. But the man had offered me an astonishing gift, his own life. In Zorba the Greek, Zorba is walking along and he runs into a 90-year-old man, 95-year-old, who's digging in the earth and planting this almond tree that won't bear fruit for 20 or 30 years. And he says, old man, how can you plant that tree? You know, you're 95 years old, you won't see it bear fruit. And the old man looked to him and said, I act, he said, and I live as if my life has no end. And Zorba then turned to his friend, he said, and I said, boss, I act as if every day was my last. Which is the right way? I have an acquaintance who was telling me about an old man he knows who's so sensitive to impermanence, he won't buy green bananas. Not sure, you know. As if holding on makes a difference. Now, in the great story or myth of the night of the Buddha's enlightenment, he sat under the Bodhi tree and stilled himself and opened his consciousness and his mind so broadly and so deeply, with such clarity. In the first 2 watches of the night, he looked at the very nature of life. And as his mind became luminous and clear, and all time appeared, which it does when you become absolutely still, the past and the present and the future are always just here. He looked into the nature of time. And he said, I saw my past lives, 1, 2, 5, 10, 100, 1,000. Now, you don't have to believe in past lives to meditate. You can just do it in this life. It's fine. There's no need to believe in all of that stuff. It's true, but you don't have to believe it, right? But anyway, so he looked. And there he said, I was born in such and such a place and made certain karma and then was reborn in this other life again and again and again, 10,000 times. And then as his meditation deepened, he turned his consciousness to see the life of many beings and saw beings in all forms and sorts being born from one life or one existence to another in the cycles of great hundreds of thousands of kalpas of time, each being the father or mother or sister or brother to another over and over again. The world cycles, 100,000 mahakalpas. Saw those who had short lives and long lives. Saw the beings that lived simply and those who lived complexly. Houston Smith, who was a wonderful teacher and friend, when he met with the Dalai Lama in exile in India in the early years, he was still a professor at MIT. So the Dalai Lama, interested in science, said, "Tell me, Houston, what is the latest scientific view on the beginnings of the universe?" And so Houston, coming from MIT, explained the whole thing of the Big Bang. The Dalai Lama was very interested. And then Houston said, "Do you have anything in Buddhism that is the equivalent of the Big Bang?" The Dalai Lama reflected for a bit and he said, "I think more accurately in the Buddhist tradition, we would call it the bang, bang, bang theory of the universe. That as the Buddha looked, he saw whole universes appear for vast eons of time and then disappear. And there were earths and planets of all kinds and beings of every form, and then they would vanish. And again, out of nothing would come new universes." Now, maybe you can't see that far, but you can see the change of seasons and notice the earth go around the sun, because that's what the change of seasons comes from. And you can see the change of civilizations. There's 28 or 30 or more in our history books, empires, the Sumerian Empire, the Babylonians, you remember cuneiform writing and all of that stuff, the Egyptians, the Chinese, the Persians, the Greeks, the Hittites, the Romans, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, remember that one? It was big, right? Until recently. Or the Portuguese Empire, the Dutch, or even the Russian Empire. Empires a dime a dozen. Remember Ozymandias? Yes. So that's the perspective that the Buddha had, the Night of Enlightenment, looking at the arising and passing of vast stretches of time and beings doing the dance of our life. Now these days, especially in California, it's easy for spiritual practice to become confused with self-improvement. You know what I mean? It can either be what Alan Watts described as a grim duty, to make yourself better. You're the survivor or the perpetrator or the victim or the something, and we are survivors or we are addicts or all these things. But one can make that so much an identity that you lose a sense of something greater. Or you come with some limited sense of yourself, the problems of your body, the tasks you have to do, the stories you tell of your life, your fears, your hopes. And if you practice right, you'll become less neurotic or less greedy or more relaxed, or your personality will become more pleasant, or you'll be better at tennis or lovemaking or something. Or you'll just be a great spiritual human being, And of course it can help. Meditation or various things can do that. But in the ground of it, to sit or to enter a spiritual practice, to awaken, is not about self-improvement, but about opening to what is our true nature. To rest in that space of truth, as the Buddha did in the midst of all of life under the Bodhi tree. That's not improvement, but rather it's letting go. Zhuang Su, old Taoist sage, he said, "A drunken man who falls out of a cart, though he may suffer, does not die. His bones are the same as other people's, but he meets his accident in a different way. His spirit is in a condition of security. He's not conscious of riding in the cart, neither is he conscious of falling out of it. Ideas of life, death, fear, and the like cannot penetrate his heart, his breast, and so he does not suffer from contact with so-called objective existence. If such security is to be gotten from wine, how much more can it be gotten from the divine? It's not about improvement, but letting go. And as we learn to let go, there comes a sense of grace, of the seasons. Like Ryokan, the wonderful Zen poet, who said, for 70 years, I've been looking at the actions of men and women. I give up. He said, if you want to know the truth, I just sit in my hut, stretch my feet out by the fire and answer. Enough already. To rest. The waves of the mind, you sat for a little bit here. Thoughts come and go, stories tell themselves. Sometimes it's called witness consciousness, to witness or to watch what's there. I don't like that language very much, so I haven't used it for many years. And the reason I don't like the word watch or witness is because it can so easily become a part of distancing ourselves from life. Removing. It plays into that place where spiritual life seems, well, I'll get out of this life into something better, which isn't where freedom lies. That's just fear. Do you remember the story of the old grandfather who'd never ridden on an airplane? So his niece and nephew decided, okay, before he dies, he should have an airplane ride, and they hired a pilot at a small plane in one of the local airports. And he was kind of nervous, but he got in the plane anyway. Went up and they took him all over his farm and the valleys around and so forth, then landed. They said, well, how did you like it? He said, well, it was quite fantastic up there. And they said, well, were you scared? He said, nah, I was a little bit nervous, but I never really did let my weight down fully on the seat. That's really what meditation is about. It's finally just sitting down on it, you know? From Rumi. In times of sudden danger, people call out, oh my God, why would they keep doing this if it didn't help? Only a fool keeps going back where nothing happens. The whole world lives in a safeguarding. Fish inside waves, birds held in the sky. Everything, all exist, are held in the divine. Nothing is ever alone for a single moment. So the place of peace is really that of trusting, opening a spacious heart in the midst of our life. To meditate, as I said, is like taking the one seat in the center of the theater of life, opening the doors and windows, making space within our consciousness, within our being, for all things. And space is central to awakening. In the Taoist tradition, they talk about anything of value, of real value, is the space. I mean, the cup is worth nothing. Oh, it's plastic. That's good. What's of value is the space within it that can be filled with liquid. It's not the cup, but it's the fact that within it, there's space for the water. Space in the car is what makes it valuable. Space in the room. We tend to look at the people and the artwork in the room, but actually what allows us to be here is space. We float, we move through space. And it's not just space outside, but as one looks, it's space inside. When you look into your mind and into your heart, you discover it's the same as looking out to the stars. It's this vast inner space. Often in interviews, in retreats, and working with people in meditation practice, they're caught in fear or in some difficult story or tension in their body or great pain or fire, all the stuff that comes, regret, grief, guilt, plans. And I'll say, just close your eyes for a moment and feel the fear or the grief or the guilt or the fire or the pain and give it space. In fact, let it get bigger. Let it get as big as it wants. Feel how big it wants to get. And let the space around it be so vast that it can open. And as people do, and they meditate and pay attention, it gets bigger and more intense, and they grieve or they cry or they get angry or frightened or whatever. It gets bigger and bigger, and pretty soon it turns into fog and dissipates. And in the very center of what seemed difficult is the same space that held it. It's true every time, because what we are is space. We come out of space. Suzuki Roshi, remember almost his most famous line, "To give your cow or sheep a large, spacious meadow is the best way to control him." Space to breathe. Space to feel your feelings. Space for grief. Space for joy. Just space to be alive. How wonderful to open space. To rest in space. The Buddha smiles, the smile of the Buddha is a place of peace and spaciousness, a kind of oasis. The space, if you pay attention in meditation, it's always there, space. The space between breaths. The space between the words. The space between thoughts. The space in the body as you feel it, between sensations. The space between stories, beliefs. Remember that line from Henry Miller where he wrote, "It was incredible to discover that all I had written of the man, I could very well have written the opposite." We have one set of beliefs, and a little while later, the space changes and there's another point of view. "A philosopher is wedded to their opponent," said Lao Tzu. We fight, we get into it, and then all of a sudden it dissolves. I had a friend who teaches with me, was sitting with a close relative who died, and a lot of grief and difficulty at first, and finally a somewhat peaceful death. And she said, "I'm going to miss this person so much." And she said, "After she died, I found an amazing thing. I thought she would go away, and she did in a way. But there was not just less of her, there was also more of her. Instead of being localized, she was everywhere, this person that I loved. She was in the sunset, she was in walks with me, she was in my own breath." Rumi. "You are granite, I am an empty wine glass. You know what happens when we touch. You laugh like the sun coming up laughs as the morning star disappears into it. Love opens my chest, and thought vanishes like clouds. Patience and rational consideration disappear. Love is the only reality. Don't keep complaining. Let the language of fear crack open and float away." Rumi says, let's come down from the ivory tower and never go back again. So spaciousness. In the Christian mystical tradition, in Latin, it's called the apatheia. There's a certain divine apathy, which doesn't mean not caring, but divine equilibrium, the Tao, the seasons. Spring comes and the grass grows of itself. Happiness cannot be found through great effort and willpower. Haven't you discovered that? It's already there in relaxation, letting go. Don't strain yourself. There's nothing to do. Wanting to grasp the ungraspable, you exhaust yourself. As soon as you relax, space is here, open, inviting. Make use of it. It's yours already. Let the game happen on its own, arising and falling back without changing anything, like a rainbow vanishing and reappearing without end. Tibetan text. So this is the seed of equilibrium, being balanced in the dance of life, seeing that all beings have a cycle of birth and death. We can love them, we can care for them, but we can't change them very well. Haven't you noticed that? Can't even change yourself very much to speak of others. You can do what you can, but you can't let go for another person. or get enlightened for them. Equilibrium, the balance of equanimity, is taught with compassion. And in the crown chakra, in the seat of the head, there is this place to rest in which we sense this balance of the world, to rest in that which is timeless. My old teacher in Bombay, Nisargadatta, studied with this old man who always talked about the absolute. Somebody said, well, you're an old man. Are you afraid of dying? And he said, are you kidding me? I refuse to accept the fact that I was born. That's your illusion. This is only the food body. It has nothing to do with me. So if I wasn't born, where could I go? That was his answer. Spaciousness is coolness. The word for nirvana is spaciousness, coolness. Buddhadasa, a wonderful teacher of mine who died a couple of days ago, and I'll speak about him next week. He talked about marketplace nirvana. The fragrance, the sweet fragrance, like the fragrance of flowers, of any place where you feel coolness, of spaciousness, of void, of just letting go a little bit. And so in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it says, sons and daughters of noble families, remember who you are. Know your own true and radiant nature. Remember the clear light that is your true nature, that was never born and never dies. So that rest, that trust that we seek is just here. It's not far away. It is nearer than near.